Welcome to the Spa Girls podcast, the self-publishing podcast for authors. You're in the right place for the best writing, marketing, and publishing advice, plus interviews with industry experts and best-selling authors. I'm Cheryl Phipps.
I'm Shah Barrett.
And I'm Trudy J. And I'm so excited. This week we have Theodora Taylor with us.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, Theodora.
Hi and welcome.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that we were so gutted when you couldn't attend conference, and we're so pleased to see that you're well and healthy now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I was
Awesome.
really sad.
Yes, so many people were disappointed, I can't tell you, but hopefully
time.
another time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Theodora, in case you've been living under a rock, is awesome. But I'm going to read your bio out quickly, and then we'll just get into it. We're going to talk about creating buttery blurbs today. But first, the bio. So Theodora Taylor is the best-selling author of Hot Books with Heart, with more than 45 sexy and compelling romance novels published since she first began in 2011. Theodora's 50 Loving States series, which features alternative heroes and smart, feisty heroines, has become a one-click stop for thousands of readers. We're not thinking of ways to write and sell even more books with Hot Books with Heart. She enjoys spending time with her amazing family, going on date nights with her wonderful husband, learning German, or watching all the Shonda Rhimes shows ever. That's very difficult to say. I just want to point that out. And she is very awesome. And attending parties thrown by others, which I also agree with. Like,
Yes. No cleanup.
yeah, she's also the creator of the Universal Fantasies concept, a brilliant method for understanding what readers want in our books, and the subject of her non-fiction book, Seven Figure Fiction. Welcome to the spa.
Woo. Again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. Now, we last had you on the show, and you talked about Universal Fantasies there. It was episode 315, and that was in October 2021. If anyone wants to go back on the website and listen to that, I would recommend it. So what have you been doing since 2021? Update us.
So writing, I launched a course, and then I launched a little baby course for Blurbs. So I launched a big course for books, and then I launched a baby course for Blurbs. And I also moved to Florida, which was crazy. So a lot, and of course, writing books. So basically teaching and writing.
Yeah, fantastic. That's awesome. So let's start with a little bit of definition. Let's figure out, so for anyone who hasn't heard of Universal Fantasies, can you just give us the basic rundown? What are they? How are they different to tropes? Like, well, what are we? Yeah, explain it all.
Great. Yeah, so Universal Fantasies, if you want to like boil it down to one line, it's the reasons people will enjoy your book. The reasons people will enjoy your book. And it's also why people will connect with your book. So a universal fantasy, often people ask, oh, is that trope? And I guess the answer is kind of, but not really. Trope is what it is. So for example, if I'm trying to sell you Beauty and the Beast, a book that's a Beauty and the Beast retelling, you can say, oh, the trope is Beauty and the Beast. But universal fantasies are what makes that trope taste good. So if we're going with the Beauty and the Beast trope, actually, we'll go with another trope, because I think the last time I was on the show, I did Beauty and the Beast.
Beauty and the Beast, yeah.
Yeah, I did do Beauty and the Beast the last time I was on this show. So one of the things that we cover in my blurb class is, like, say, arranged marriage. And so within the arranged marriage trope, you have the universal fantasy of arranged love turns into real love. So people are going to want to see like these two people who are in a marriage of convenience, or either have been forced into marriage for some random reason, and they're not really in love. It's going to develop into real love. That's a fantasy that people love to see played out. Another fantasy that is often played out within arranged marriage trope is what I call the spouse detective. And that's when you have to figure out the mystery of this person that you're married to. And even though in Jane Eyre, she's not married to this potential spouse yet, and she's not really trying to figure out the mystery. There is a mystery that we're going to figure out over the course of the book, and people really tap into that with arranged marriage. So that's what I mean about it not quite being trope. So obviously, if you have a universal fantasy of arranged marriage turns into real love, that if you have the trope of arranged marriage, the universal fantasy is going to be arranged marriage turns into real love. And then other things that are going to lend to that is the mystery of finding out who your spouse really is, and other things that might come up as well. For example, in a Shonda show that I just loved, Queen Charlotte, she becomes a queen. Yes. And I call that universal fantasy Cher becoming Cher. So we all know, if the show's called Queen Charlotte, so we all know this person is going to become a queen at some point. So it's great in this show to see her not only gaining more confidence, but perhaps more important than her gaining more confidence is her hair becoming bigger, her wigs becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, until she becomes the Queen Charlotte that we were familiar with before we started this show. So that's, you know, stepping into your queenhood. That is a huge, especially if you write shifter romance, where some random person is going to become like some alpha's princess. That person actually becoming a queen, that is a fantasy that readers love to see.
Yeah.
And I'm going to stop there because I could go on about this all day. But we have other things to talk.
Do you think it also, like, part of that is it almost creates scenes that readers love? Like, I'm reading a book at the moment, the Wolf Shifter one, and it's called,
What are you reading at the moment?
it's called the a Wolf Shifter romance called, I think it's called The Wolf King, and it's basically like a bachelor style thing where he's looking for a wife, and these five girls from all these different packs have to go and prove why they're the one, and the main girl doesn't really want to be the one, and so she's trying not to win, and just all that, all that goodness. But there's certain scenes in it where I'm just going, oh, this is so buttery to me. And one of the scenes,
I'm going to assume that one of the scenes is going to be something that proves that she's not like the other girls. So it's like, I am special. I am not like these other girls. I stand out from these other girls somehow. And then another scene would be, he chooses me. It's a complete surprise. Like, the most popular person, the most powerful person in your world chooses you, the girl who's not like the other girls. So that kind of being special, that's another fantasy that a lot of readers have.
And I feel like the difference in my mind between a trope and a universal fantasy is that a trope is like, oh yeah, I like enemies to lovers, that's fine. But a universal fantasy is like, oh my God, I love that bitch. Oh! Like, you just get so much more emotionally kind of engaged with the universal fantasies than I feel that I am with the tropes. That even though I love a trope, it's more specific or something.
Yeah, it is more specific. I think I'm going to try not to keep on referencing the last interview, but one of the things we talked about was just kind of knowing what's in your food as a writer. So you know what you're serving. If you say to yourself, I'm going to serve a great enemies to lovers story. The nice thing about universal fantasy, when you know what universal fantasies you're cooking with, it's really helpful to say, okay, well, I'm going to have this scene where her boss is being a total boss hole, but then he does something nice for her. And so we see that he's a fixer-upper with potential and stuff like that. So I forgot, I lost my point.
Yeah, no,
that was a good point.
But yeah, but it helps you. It helps, I think, when coming up with plot and coming up with what scenes are just really like the readers are going to eat up and find yummy. So if you know what you're working with, when you know why enemies to lovers taste good. Not just that you have enemies to lovers, but just why it will taste good. It's going to be easier for you to not only hopefully write that book, but also market it to the right audience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's brilliant. And so that's Universal Fantasies as a whole. So what's butter? Well, how does butter work into this?
Butter, butter, I feel like that's just the ingredient that makes it good. Like, so let's go back to arranged marriage. We have queen becoming a queen. And so the universal fantasy is queen becomes a queen. And the butter is how you get there. So I'm talking about the fancy dresses. She comes in, her dress is somewhat simple, like if we discount the wedding dress, but by the end, this dress is going to be taking up a lot of room. We're talking about the wigs. We're talking about the conversations with people where, for example, her relationship with her mother-in-law, where in the first conversation, the mother-in-law is talking down to her. And that's what I would call spreading the butter of queen becomes queen. Like it's often the opposite of where she's going to end up at the end. So in the first scene with the mother-in-law, and this is a huge fantasy that will appear in a lot of things, especially when there's a powerful mother-in-law. It's just like the mother-in-law, it has power over her, is keeping her under her thumb, is talking down to her, very obviously does not respect her. And a middle scene, maybe the mother-in-law is winning or the mother-in-law pulls something on her. But by the end of the book, the way that this universal fantasy is going to be served is with this hugely buttery conversation or argument or power move where she proves that she is now the queen. Mother-in-law, sit down. So that's kind of like those arguments are the butter, but it's the butter, but that's just how the universal fantasy of her becoming Queen Charlotte is playing out.
I was just, as you were saying that, I was thinking of another amazing scene in Crazy Rich Asians where they're playing mahjong at the end, and it's the mother-in-law or the potential mother-in-law. I mean, that's just I love that. It's my favorite scene of the whole thing.
And they're literally playing mahjong, and it's just kind of like,
just
ooh.
So well done. So well done. Yeah.
Yes. Your move.
Yeah.
My move.
I'm not playing with you anymore. I've won no matter what. Oh, so good.
And it's kind of like you create the build up, like that scene in the beginning of Queen Charlotte where the mother-in-law has all the power almost, and then it's kind of like the setup for that final scene so that we can feel amazing and awesome when she becomes the powerful one and the mother-in-law kind of almost gets her comeuppance, and it's like how it floats through.
I think before you become a mother-in-law, like most readers will love to see a mother-in-law put it in her
and then once you are,
if I become a mother-in-law, I will probably not like these scenes. Just kind of, I forgot what I was watching the other day, and this teenager was just like acting a fool, and I was like, oh, I guess I am no longer young. On this teenager's side. This is too much.
No longer on the side of that teenager. Yeah, that's awesome.
But for them, for their fair, that is a huge fantasy for them to stand up to their parents, for them to take power back from their parents, for them. But as a parent watching it, you're kind of like, they're just trying to protect you. They're just trying to help.
Exactly.
Why won't you listen?
I know. Why won't you listen?
Now that's an interesting point. So do our universal fantasy and butter rescenes for us changes as we move through life, changes from, and it obviously changes from genre to genre. So like the genres we like maybe when we're younger versus older, but even if we take age out of it, the different genres. So how do we know what's buttery in the different genres? How do we figure that out?
So there are a few ways you can do it. So first of all, I think especially as independent writers, we've all had friends who are just kind of like, see that you're somewhat successful and they're just like, oh, I could do that. And it's just like, and then they try to write a romance novel and they've never written a romance novel. They don't even like romance novels. And the reason it never works, almost never works, unless this person kind of has a sincere interest in romance, is because they will not be able to recognize why this trope tastes good. So just being a fan is a really, really good indicator. I don't necessarily recommend writing to market, but if, in my opinion, if there's something popular and you like it, figure out why you like it. Like, you know, literally make a list. I don't write romantasy, but when I read, sorry, I didn't write it, but when I read Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, it was just like, ooh, let me make a list. you know, even though that wasn't my genre, I was just kind of like, why do I like this so much? This is not my genre. What is it about? What is it about this that I really, really love? So I would feel, because I know what I liked about this romantasy, and I'm reading, what's it called? North Wind by Alexandra.
Sorry.
It doesn't matter.
We'll put it in the show notes later.
It does matter. But I'm reading this book by her, and it has like a lot of Beauty and the Beast, a lot of Hunger Games inside of it. And so it's just kind of like, oh, this, at least for the first 50 pages that I've read so far, man, this book works. And so I'm noting what works in these romantasy novels. I'm noting that, you know, you can pull from other things that you love. Like this has so much Hunger Games with a sister who basically volunteers to take the place of her sister who's going to be married off to a beast called the North Wind. And
the
so
North Wind, sorry, I just quickly Googled, it's Alexandria Warwick.
Thank you. It's like, I know her last name starts with a W. I'm saying Rento is Alexandria Warwick. She's doing a fabulous job of bringing in just so much butter from other genres and kind of serving a meal that is just very tasty, that you want to, it's like, oh, now what's going to happen? Now what's going to happen? So it's a page turner.
I do feel like sometimes like I was just thinking about authors who don't provide the butter, and I do wonder if maybe sometimes that's because of plotting. It sounds really bad, but like they over plot something and they like getting from destination to destination to create this overarching thing and forgetting those little scenes that you were talking about, like the buttery scenes that kind of make us really engage with a.
I honestly think that's why we're kind of in the age of the TikTok writer, because they do understand, like, hey, vibes. You know, it's not not just a clear plot that hits every bit of the structure, but it's also vibes. How's this going to make you feel? How would this scene boil down into a TikTok that you can then sell? So I do think I personally really, really love structure. I was brought up with structure, but at the same time, sometimes structure can get in the way it's not just structure, I should say. Like if you just never forget, like, oh, yes, I want them to understand that I want them to understand that she's the queen of this, or that she's a princess of this starving kingdom. How can I do it in a way that really, really lets us know that this is a suffering Cinderella? Her stepmother doesn't like her, Like, how can we do this in a way that really connects with the audience? So, you know, if you're doing the Cinderella trope, you're setting up your suffering Cinderella. What butter can we add to hit our plot points, but also make a great TikTok, you know, and instantly have the audience connect with your character.
Because it's all about feeling, isn't it? You can hit all the right notes in it as far as this happens and this happens, and you know, it can be a great story, but if it doesn't have the feels, then it just doesn't resonate with you, doesn't it? It doesn't feel like it's, you know, we know we're talking about fantasy, but it doesn't feel real.
Exactly.
It's interesting that you talk about TikTok, because there is some, people sometimes go, oh, it's just TikTok, but actually what you have to do is distill the best hook, the best universal fantasy, the best butter that you can from your book into this tiny, it's actually amazing practice, an amazing thing for us to,
and if you're in the back of your head, I have one writer friend who does write like that, where she's just kind of like chapter. Could I make a TikTok out of this chapter? I can't do that. My process is a little too scattered for that. But if you can, I was just like, that's not a terrible way to write, to like help your audience so much that you can say, hey, this is the TikTok that's in this chapter. And I think for her, if she can't think of a good TikTok for the chapter, she's like, oh.
Wow. To me, that's like a supercomputer way of approaching it, like that. Just to my can I just say, my intellection learner, all of that stuff is just going wild on that, because I would never be able to define it down like that. That's so I admire somebody that can do it that way. I totally get, though, if you can do that, man, that's a superpower.
Yes, it is.
Even if you don't use TikTok, it's just a framework for identifying
what is the hook, what is the thing in this chapter that's going to really capture the interest of the reader and keep them going, like it,
because then you can use it for advertising or any sort of promotion you want to do. If you've got that hook just sitting there ready.
But even it doesn't even have to be for anything like that. It's like, if you have the hook, the reader is hooked. The reader's gonna, word of mouth, that's where that comes from. The reader being hooked until the end. I mean, you talk about Fourth Wing, and I know there was probably lots of promotions and traditionally published stuff behind that, but I think it is, as you say, so filled with so much butter. As I'm reading that first chapter, I can't remember how many chapters in, when they're crossing the bridge and she gives up one of her shoes.
Chapter, maybe the third chapter.
It's pretty
I love the first chapter. She's like going up the stairs, and the way my teenage daughter just freaking loved this book. It was one of the few times where she did listen to her mother. I was just like, I think you're really gonna like this. You're gonna want to annotate this. So I got her, like, because she does the annotation, the big teenage. I don't know if that's caught on in New Zealand.
Not so much. I've seen it, but not so much.
Well, she does these big annotations of things, and I was like, I think I ordered her the book, and I was like, I think you're going to want to annotate this. And the way she loved it from the beginning, because it's just like, oh, you're going up the stairs, you're confronting your powerful mother. Maybe I should be insulted by how much she liked this one. And your mother is just like, well, you have to do this. And your sister's like, you're gonna die, like you're being underestimated. And so now we're just like completely hooked in, because it's just like, not only does it really tap into that teenage stuff of, oh, I'm underestimated, I have to prove myself to my parent, but also kind of being ruled over by your mother making you so angry, or feeling like your mother doesn't care about you or cares more about her job than you. So it just really taps into so much. So you're already going in to that fantastic bridge scene with like, is she gonna die? And then you're like watching people literally die.
Left, right, and center.
Yes. I remember it would kind of felt to me, she does a really great thing. Shonda does this so well, where they introduce you to someone, especially if it's like on Grey's Anatomy. They'll introduce you to someone, make you love them, sometimes over the course of many episodes, but sometimes she does it over the course of a scene, like make you love this person and then kill them.
Just like that.
And that's what I loved about that scene. She had the two friends that she made, and I was like, one of them's gonna die, like literally we know it.
I walked right into that. I didn't know that was dealing with fire. It was just kind of like, I was just like, oh, and he's telling his little story. And I was like, oh, well, I hope, he thrives, and then
gone.
Terrible.
And also the fact that she has a disability, right? I mean, that's just that just amped it up for me, because I'm thinking, how can she possibly do all this stuff when she's got this problem, you know, that two bones
But
can
it sets
break.
her up really well for
Yeah.
what do my students call it? Competence butter. And this is when you get to watch someone be really competent. It's just like, oh, hey, I'm weak. How am I going to get around this? How am I going to be clever? How am I going to, and you're in, it's really great watching her come up with a plan and then being like, it's going to work. Or, you know, or her plan runs into a barrier, a really hot barrier that, you know, with that great light. And I say in the book, if you can't have them have sex, have them fight. And this was a great example of that. You know what, I'm spoiling. But at the same time, if you read the book, you know what I'm talking about.
No, that's awesome. That is really good. And it is really a good example of lots of universal fantasies and lots of butter, that book. So let's think about blurbs. Like we were kind of talking about blurbs before. And so if someone's written a book already and they're trying to write the blurb about it, and we've already established we don't want to tell the plot, we want to find the butter. How do we find the butter, and how do we figure out what needs to go in the blurb?
Right. There's a few tactics that you can use. Like for my class, I give people a sheet, which is just basically like just ask a few questions. And it's just basically figuring out, hey, what is my butter? Because sometimes we've written the book and we don't even know until it's just kind of like, oh, name five pieces of butter from the plot. Name 5 universal. What are 3 universal fantasies or a big universal fantasy that's happening over the course of this story? Because one of the things that people sometimes don't do is say to themselves, okay, this is enemies to lover. This is what makes it enemies to lover. This is a specific thing about this character that makes it enemies to lover. Like if I'm writing a blurb for a boss hole, enemies to lovers romance, there's certain things you're going to want in your blurb. Like you're going to want an example of this boss hole being a boss hole. You're going to want to put these people in forced proximity. That's situational butter. But basically, without knowing what the story is, I think your first step is always just to figure out what makes my characters appealing. And by appealing, I don't necessarily mean that they have to be likable. They just have to connect with the audience somehow. So if you have a boss hole, the audience is going to really want to see that boss put in his place, brought down by love, you know. But first we need to know that this guy's a boss hole. So, you know, making sure that people know who your characters are. This is a boss hole. This is a suffering Cinderella who maybe really needs money in order to pay her grandma's nursing home bill. The boss hole is the worst, but in order to get his inheritance, he needs to he needs to have a fake engagement. So she's in forced proximity and he's horrible, but he's kind of growing on her. And what is she going to do with these feelings? And that's the blurb. So it's not like, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. It's kind of like, these are the appealing characters. This is the big buttery situation. And in order to find out what happens, you're going to have to read the book. Like it's what I call story bait, which is kind of like, oh, the big question, the big situation that in order to find out how this all ends, we now have to read the book.
I now want that book. I don't suppose you've written that yet. So what I find intriguing about that is that you've got the two characters, right? And then there's the conflict between them. So it's not just he was a handsome dude and she was this pretty princess.
Right.
It's you're taking the characteristics. So he's an asshole and she's desperate for money. and a
Right.
Cinderella, whatever. And and immediately when someone says that, I can see the conflict. As a reader, you kind of go, I can already see the scenes that are going to happen. I know. And it's not, in my mind, it's not going to be a good book unless you show me immediately how much of an asshole this guy or bosshole this guy is.
Exactly. Displays of assholedom is very, very, like, it's just kind of like, and it's funny, I get two things sometimes, which is just kind of like, she's irritated by this guy, but he's not doing big enough displays of assholery, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, he's not doing anything to her. One of the things that makes the Sally Thorne thing so great is Sally Thorne's The Hating Game so great, is that at the beginning of the book, they have this very adversarial, they're physically doing things to each other, taking things from each other. So you can see that they are enemies. This is a big display of them being enemies. And one of the things I see often, I'm about to do a Better Beginnings course for October, but one of the things I see often in the beginnings of books is people saying, oh, he's terrible, or she's a suffering Cinderella, and not making them suffer, not making the person terrible.
Not showing them suffering.
Right. Like, we really need them to suffer.
It's almost like that show versus tell. Like, sometimes an author will go, he was a really grumpy, asshole boss, and he was my enemy, but they don't ever have that scene where he's being an enemy. And that's the thing that you need to, like, you have to be actually,
you need to really have that scene where they have some big display that we're going to really want them to be put in their place. If we're talking about an enemy or a fixer-upper, or somebody who we're going to want to see redeemed by the end.
One of the great things about The Hating Game is that she genuinely did not realize that it was anything more than them hating each other.
Yes. I love when people don't see it.
And then I think that's what the movie got wrong, is they switched it around, and there was a scene in the elevator when he kisses her, and she was genuinely like, what? Where did this come from? And she didn't see it. But in the movie they switched it around and made it all wrong. That's my personal opinion. I'm sticking with it. So
hopefully, because I've just barely come out of an Allie Hazelwood obsession.
I love her so much.
She writes this great plot where the guy's in love with her and she just doesn't see it, and we see it as the audience, but we're just like, you find out that he actually likes you, or he doesn't hate you, or da da da. Oh, I just love that. I love that. So hopefully they really keep it in the movie, where in the inevitable movies that will be made of these books, where the woman is completely like, oh.
Can I just ask, which one is that? Which of Allie Hazelwood books is that one?
So the first one, Love Hypothesis, is still probably her most popular one. My personal favorite, because it's just such a great enemies to lover, and it has one of the best misunderstandings I've ever seen. And the Suffering Cinderella is so good, but it's done in a very Purple Cow kind of way. That's when it's a Suffering Cinderella. Like, we've all seen Suffering Cinderellas, but this Suffering Cinderella really stands out because she's a very poor adjunct professor. So it's one of those things that if you know kind of like American academia, and even if you don't, the person who's a very poor grad student or adjunct professor, not being paid enough, is desperate to get a job to lift her out of her circumstances. So it was a great Suffering Cinderella. She also is diabetic, so there's like a chance for the hero to help her, but she's trying to hide that she's diabetic. Oh, it's just great. So that's called Love Theoretically, and that's my personal favorite. But I just read Love on the Brain, her latest one, and I really like that too, because I sent it to my sister's a chemical engineer, and the person really has an introverted personality where she doesn't particularly like people. I don't see often where you have kind of a grump. He's not sunshine, but you have a grump who is the heroine is the grump.
Yeah.
So it was really great to have an introverted heroine. So I thought she did a great job with that.
Well,
That's
my
awesome.
TBR pile has just got.
I know.
So
They should invite me on things because I'm just like,
Yeah. Oh no.
yeah, you know, all the buttery books. I love Ellie Hazelwood though, so I would
But
so
if anybody, I think actually just in that discussion, when we were saying I love that part, like that is the butter, right? That's the I
right.
love that part. It wasn't necessarily the plot. It was the butter. It was the what you love about it.
Well, the plot, especially for Love Theoretically, is very simple. It's just like she's up for a job. Oh, I don't even want to spoil even a bit of it. She is like this. So it's somewhat simple. Like she's up for a job. There's lots of misunderstandings. Will she get the job or will she not get the job? You know, she really needs the job, but this guy is standing in between her getting this enemy is standing in between her getting the job. So it's just, but as it turns out, maybe he really likes her. Like in my book, I call it surprise. The bully really likes you. Like the person who's being mean to you actually likes you. So
Love it.
it is, yeah, it is kind of that scene that we're waiting for where he kind of reveals that, no, actually, I like you, or we have chemistry. And yeah, I'll stop because I feel like
we all know what you mean though. Like that's our favorite bits in the in all the movies and books we've seen, and you know that's what we're looking for. What if you've written your book and you just go, I just don't think I've got that in there? Like, do you have to add stuff to your book, or is it because you're just too close to it and there's
Well, it's up to you. It's up to you. It's funny because every so once in a while I write a book and I never say what they are because to my shock, I'll write one of these books and I'll feel, hey, this is dry. This is not buttery. This is a dry book. This is not the most buttery thing I've ever done. And hey, don't write yourself into that corner again. Don't do that again. And, you know, and I will do it again, like in maybe 2 or 3 years. And then I just release the book because I don't think there's anything I can do. Also, I have a very short attention span. I literally cannot look at the book again. So it's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna have to release it. And it's up to the fans to decide if this book is not buttery. And usually sales reflects that. I'm usually not wrong about a book not being buttery, but some people can go fix it. Like, you know, you can work with a developmental editor. I always say, get help, get help. I think the number one thing that I see writers not doing, especially when it comes to universal fantasy and butter, is kind of like not asking for help or tapping in to their audience. Like they'll just kind of sit there and they'll be like, I wonder, I don't know if this is buttery. I don't know if this is buttery. And then they won't ask their writer friends for help. And these are people who do have writer friends, but they won't say, hey, can I call you up and go over this plot with you? Can you just listen to me? Can you tell me what's good about this? Can you see if you spot any butter? So I think if you really want to fix something, ask for help.
Yeah.
I ask for help all the time. I ask for help all the time. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah.
do you write the blurb before you write the book? Is that something you do?
I try to. And I feel it goes better if I write the blurb first. But if it depends on how indulgent I can be. Like if I have a pre-order deadline coming up, then this is going to sound interesting, but I always say, okay, if you have a deadline and it's like really barreling down on you, then you need to do a full outline. You have to you have to do all those things. You have to do all that prep work. You should write the blurb so that you just have that touchstone as you're going along. But sometimes, you know, like right now I'm writing without a blurb because I have time. I can, you know, I can take time with it. I don't have a pre-order deadline that's barely forward. So,
Yeah.
and you know, I actually do prefer writing on pre-order deadline because there's less like, oh, why do I even write? Can I
You just have to write, and that's the
yeah,
end
you
of
just
it.
have to write. It's nice to like just cut that out.
And it's
If
quite
you-
good actually if you're getting stuck, I think, too, because if
Yeah.
you start writing the blurb, suddenly you've got a place to go, or you can
Right.
see, you know, the trees for the wood. You know, it's yeah.
I had one bestseller and I got so stuck on it in the middle that I not only like I broke it down for all of its butter and I did like a big outline and I was just like, this is the butter, da da da, and I wrote the blurb and then I went back to page one and it turned out really great because it was just like, oh, if you're stuck, if you
Yeah.
really can't see the forest for the trees, that's a great time to like outline. I'm always just like, if you don't need an outline at the beginning, don't have an outline. But if you need an outline, you can do it in the middle of the book. You can do it
Yeah.
right before the end of the book. You can do it whenever you need that outline.
Yeah, that's good. No rules. There's no way
No.
that you should be doing things. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you
I
have
always
Except
say
for
in my
putting in
course,
butter.
there are no writing police.
do you have a butter quota? Like how like a certain amount of butter that has to go in?
How much is too much butter?
Yeah. Well, I'm just
I
thinking
don't
a
think there's
minimum actually, but
ever too much butter. I think there are things you can do to make it not genuine. Like if you pile it on to like, oh, this is no longer authentic to the situation. And even that, I'm horrible. I'll be like, oh, I love a big over the top, you know, romantic, like big gesture. I don't care if this would really not work in the real world. I love that kind of thing. But I always say if it feels like it couldn't possibly happen, there's one of two things happening: is either too much butter or you haven't properly spread it and baked it, which is like setting us up for this big happy ending. So, you know, in Queen Charlotte, if you know, we don't even see the mother-in-law, and the mother-in-law comes in the third act, and Queen Charlotte's like, I'm in charge now. You're just like, oh, okay, well, she had this big triumph over her mother-in-law, but it doesn't really mean anything to us. It seems weird, or like we're just getting that triumph. So you do need to spread it. Like we do need to see the mother-in-law be like low-key racist to her, put her in her place, try to keep her in her place so that it means that's what I mean by spreading and baking, so that it means something when we have the big serve of Queen Charlotte being like, no, I'm in charge now.
yeah. Yeah, that's really, really important. I can see that. I was actually thinking not just maximum, but is there a minimum? Like, are you thinking every chapter must add me some butter here, or are you?
I don't see any reason to have a chapter. Like, I don't even want to go a few paragraphs with at least a little bit of butter. Like, I will say with Butter Beginnings, like the big thing that I see in beginnings is people just really feeling that they have to establish the character and the situation so much that they do not have any butter. And so it's just kind of like, literally you'll get something like the person walking to the office saying, oh, this is my best friend at the office. And this is the situation at the office. And it's just kind of, and then, you know, toward the end of the chapter, maybe you'll get some but it's just stuff. It's just setting it up. And, you know, I'm always just kind of like, you know, from the start, like get that butter from the start.
Yeah.
Not to keep on adding the TBRs. I think it was called Black Tie by, I wish, she's a huge TikTok author. Was it the Black Tie Affair? But she has a situation where she's in the office, someone comes to get her, and they're just like, the new boss wants to see you. So this is like, and you're like, who's the new boss? This is page 1. And then she goes into the office. The new boss is her ex-boyfriend's older brother, who actually needs her to pretend to be his fiance in order to convince, you know, so he's bought the whole company because she wasn't returning his phone calls. And so, yes.
That's a lot of butter right there.
5 pages. Are you gonna stop reading after
No
this 5 pages?
way. That's
No
brilliant.
way. Yes, yes. It's like it's gonna take you several more pages to lose me with a buttery beginning like that. So it was really, really great. You could see why she had just blown up. I hadn't actually seen any of her TikToks. I'm sure they're great, but you know what? The only thing better than having great TikToks is having a book that, like, oh man, dang, that's a TikTok. You know, in the first page.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes.
I was going to ask also, like, now I've gotten distracted by the thoughts of this book that I'm going to go and buy as soon as we finish.
Whenever I teach a course live, at the end, like some is anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours, and at the end, I'll go, "Oh, do you have any questions?" And no one ever has any questions because they're too busy.
Yeah.
At first, I was just like, "Oh, well, maybe it didn't resonate," but then you know, people would tell me later, "Oh," or would come up to me after a talk and be like, "Oh, my mind is spinning on this book. You know, I'm going to go back up to if it was at a conference. When it's at a conference, I'm going to go up to my hotel room. I'm going to write all these thoughts." So it's kind of hard having these conversations as writers because it's just like, "Ooh, maybe I could do this with my book," or maybe
Exactly.
So true.
Yeah, oh, that's exciting. So, do you think there's different types of butter? Like I was thinking, is there character
Absolutely.
butter, setting butter? I don't know what kind of other butter there might be, but like, how do
Yeah.
we?
In I have a little book called the Universal Fantasy Romance List, and one of the things that I talk about is this butter that I kind of discovered that my husband loves. And so when we were watching this thing called For All Mankind, and it's like the last episode of the season. They are just kind of like, these people on the moon or in a space station are going to blow up if you don't fix this thing. And so they have this exciting music and they're like, ah, we're on a spaceship. Literally, we're pulling up to this thing that needs to be fixed in space. And then they get out and he proceeds to fix it. But it goes on for like maybe 30 seconds, which is a long time in screen time. And they do it from several different angles. They show him with the tools, like doing this. I'm like, why are they spending so long on this? And my husband was just like, I love this. I love seeing them fix things and stuff like that. And strangely enough, this was before at least I noticed the TikTok trend of cleaning things or like
watching people clean or do yard work, sweeping things. Oh, cleaning rugs. I love watching cleaning rugs.
Absolutely. Seriously. There's this one guy that does like he's just like, I mowed the lawn and then I put in some stones, and you just love watching it. And so I didn't quite get that this was butter for people, but that like clued me in. And then it was funny because we had this conversation. Then we went to see Mission Impossible Maverick, and there it is literally the climax. They have to do something, and then they were just like, oh, but this thing is broken. We're going to have to fix it before we can do this other this other intense thing. And so then they do the same thing that they did in For All Mankind, where you're literally watching Tom Cruise fix this thing. And I leaned over to my husband, I go, fixing the thingy-bobby. I guess I get it now. Like, people want to see you fix that thing. So,
but I
And
think
that
the
is a
lesson
common
there
thing.
maybe is that what we love is butter. Don't disregard what other people love as butter as well, right? It just might not be our personal butter.
Yeah,
absolutely. Like, I think we're obviously going to be biased. I'm always going to love my personal butter. I'm always not going to notice the fixing the thing in the bobby because I don't care. But it's nice to know what's out there, because it's just kind of like every so once in a while, I haven't done it yet, but maybe I could fix a thing in the bobby.
Fix something, yeah.
In one of my books, like, so far, not really, but
Never know.
maybe one day I'll fix it.
and I also think that works for different genres. What I was talking about before, and it always makes me think of military science fiction. When those really science detail-y books that and it's going to be sexist, but mostly men read. Like, there'll be women, but a lot of men, and they'll be the ones that kind of write into the author saying, well, you got this piece of science wrong about this, because it's really not possible for, but that's their butter, right? Like, the butter for them is the scientific end of things, and knowing, it is really the different
My
genres.
husband has this great Ian Fleming story where I guess in the first few books he was getting the guns all wrong, and then someone wrote into him and they were just like, these are the guns. And so, like, he corresponded with the guy, and he would always check the guns against like what were actual guns or what kind of guns. And then after he told me that story, I noticed that, especially in men's fiction, because I always just use a couple of Glocks, maybe a Desert Eagle, if American, I'm just like,
whatever's lying around,
whatever works. But I noticed that when it's kind of like men's fiction, they will really pay attention to the make of the gun, what the gun can do, if the gun has kickback, how the gun reacts, if the gun has special themes. So it is definitely something that
butter
seems
involved in that.
Things that are marketed toward men, for sure.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to think, like, I write urban fantasy. And so some of the buttery things that I think are in there, like the kind of main character has, she's often this kick-ass female who can take care of herself, and she's got a secret power that no one else knows about, but makes her secretly more powerful than everyone else around her, or things like that are just kind of almost.
I love that Harry Potter, but I love when someone is just kind of like, I'm a badass, or I'm hiding the power, or there's something like I have to step into my true self and show this power, or learn how to use the power. I love that too.
Yeah, that's me all over.
But using that as an example for anybody that's still thinking about the butter, so the butter would be actually displays of learning that power, like actually showing how, not just saying XYZ learned how to harness their, magic finger, but actually showing how.
But also the butter would be a scene in the beginning where they are powerless, like they don't know how to use it, or they can't use it, or they don't use it, and then a scene at the end where finally they've figured out how to use it, they can use it, and they do it successfully. Like, that's almost part of it as well, right?
And a sense of self as well. Like, I was thinking of Neville Longbottom, how he's like possibly the weakest character in the book, and then he comes out and saves the day. I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Discovery of Witches has a really great plot line like that too, where it's just kind of like, literally, she's just like, oh yeah, my parents were witches, but pitiful little sparks. And by the end of the trilogy, like, this trilogy runs on her learning, her being, I guess they call it stitched up, and her learning to use her powers. And so you do have that. I love, I wouldn't call it a mirror scene, but it's kind of like a opposite scene where at the beginning it's just like, oh, pitiful sparks. This thing is in danger. I'm in danger, and someone else has to save me because I don't have any access to my power. I'm so weak and pitiful. And then at the end of the trilogy, hopefully this trilogy was published like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
It was finished 10 years ago, so hopefully people have seen it. But she has like this big power display where it's just like, ooh, I like very much that Matrix butter where she's just kind of like hitting the bad guys with like all of her power, and it's just so big, big, the complete opposite of where she was at the beginning of the trilogy. So I love that
power thing. But I mean, in some ways, it's exactly the same as what happens in Queen Charlotte, in that she's got no power in the beginning and she gets the power at the, it's
the growth, isn't it? It's the growth of the character.
Yes. When I was in Germany, we were talking about, I was in Germany like in January, and we were talking about Cinderella. And one of the things that we were talking about is at the beginning of Cinderella, she's got her little bucket and she's, scrubbing on the floor, and, everyone's ordering her about, and they're just like, Cinderella, Cinderella, do this. And she has like this sad little outfit on, it's brown and blue. And at the end, it's just kind of like, oh, she's coming out. She's literally, everything's opposite. She's not inside, she's outside. She's coming out, there's crowds cheering her. She's not helping the mice. The mice are cheering her, and they're just like, yay, and they're throwing confetti. She has a beautiful gown. She looks more beautiful than you've ever seen her. She's not downtrodden at all. Nobody's ordering her around. In fact, she is now the princess. She gets to order them around, not that she would, but so it's just completely opposite from our first view of Cinderella. And I always say, if you're like struggling, like, I don't know how this is going to end, just kind of think, well, this is who they are at the beginning. How can we make a big scene that's opposite wherever they were at the beginning?
That's a really good.
That's a good tip,
piece of advice. Yeah. So, okay, if you're thinking about Cinderella and you're wanting to write the blurb for Cinderella, where do you start? You start with downtrodden Cinderella thinks your life is always going to be this way until one day someone brings a whatever. Like, what do you think is how do you get the butter out of that? There's so much butter in Cinderella. How do you pick the bits that are important enough to be in the blurb?
That's a really good question. Like, it's just like, how would you blurb Cinderella? Well, first, I think a suffering Cinderella is a suffering Cinderella is a suffering Cinderella. So show the suffering, show the opportunity, and then show the potential problem or the question. So if you have, it's just like, Cinderella has been suffering, but then she gets an opportunity. And I love a nice discovery, like, oh, I have a fairy godmother, or I have a power, like we were talking about beforehand. So you might want to work that in. You don't really need it, but will her evil stepmother destroy any chance she has of getting out of this miserable life? And that's the question. So if we introduce the character, the suffering Cinderella, and we show that she has this opportunity, but there's this huge obstacle. Cinderella is kind of interesting compared to today's romance, because today's romance, it's not really about kind of getting to the guy. Like, they have very little interaction in Cinderella, because it's just like, oh, I gotta just get to this opportunity in order to get out of this life. So I don't think most romance writers would write a Cinderella, but it is kind of like they're suffering, they have an opportunity to end their suffering, and now we have the question of how will they overcome the obstacle that is in between them and the happy ending.
part of the obstacle is almost her perception of herself too. Like she doesn't see that she could be anything more, maybe, or.
I mean, yeah, that's it. I think that's a great option. When I do blurb workshops for my students every month, except for this month because I had a bit of a medical emergency. But sometimes they have. We talk about that's a great book. That's great book butter versus blurb butter.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about for the blurb butter, it's just like this is like you want the stickiest butter. You don't self-realization that's just kind of vague. So, the evil stepmother who's like really like will do anything to keep her from her prince. That's more like, oh, how will she get past that evil stepmother? So while that is butter, that's definitely an arc where she's just kind of like, oh, I have the power within me. I can take control of my story by giving the person the shoe, working with the mice to get out of the situation. I think for the blurb, at least, the most interesting thing about this is that her stepmother is trying to keep her from doing this, and how will she get back past this evil stepmother?
That makes sense. That's brilliant.
Very good.
Is there anything else around butter that you think that we need to tell our audience?
Apart from signing up to Theodora's
butter
class, just saying.
Which Shah has done and has been raving to us about. So
yes, absolutely.
That is a recommendation right there, because Shah doesn't rave about courses all the time. So
I think a lot of courses and raves about very few.
I think we've talked about most. I think we've talked about most of the things that you kind of need to know, especially when it comes to blurbs. But just because for me, I always appreciate a nice recap. Just really think I'm not trying to tell people what this book is about. I'm trying to sell it. I'm trying to tell them why they will enjoy it. Make sure that people have specific reasons to like your character. They're not just a suffering Cinderella, they're suffering for a specific reason that will make people feel sorry for them or will make people root for them. So make sure that this reason is specific enough. Probably one of the most common mistakes I see just in general with blurbs is the telling people, saying, oh, she's having trouble paying her rent. Saying something like, oh, she's going to take this opportunity because she's having trouble paying her rent. And we don't really care that she's having trouble paying her rent, so we need a reason to care that she's having trouble paying her rent. So make sure you're suffering Cinderella, that we actually feel sorry for her, that we have a reason to feel sorry for her, that you're not just saying, oh, so that she can make rent. It's that so she won't be homeless, or so she can keep a roof over her and her little sister's head. Give us a real reason to care about your characters or connect about your characters. Because again, we don't have to like them, but we do have to care. And sometimes that's disliking them. So if this is a boss hole, give us a reason to dislike him in the blurb. So give us a reason to connect with the characters, and make sure that you're selling the book and that you're reassuring your audience that they will enjoy the book, and you're letting them know why they're going to enjoy the book. I hope that's
that sounds great.
Literally read my book, or get one of the many courses that are available.
Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Theodora. You're a superstar. I love having you. That's awesome. So if someone wants to find you, where's the best place to go?
Sevenfigurefiction.com.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. And that's where the courses are. Yeah, that's perfect. Brilliant. And I've got the book and I love the book as well. So
thank you.
yeah, you're awesome. I love the work that you do. So well done.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
who wants to say where we can be found?
I'm actually going to say that we've had a lot of recommendations, so I've been writing them down. I'm showing now on the screen.
Yeah.
So if you're out walking or jogging or listening to this driving, if you go to our show notes at spargirls.com, spargirlspodcast.com. Spargirls gives you a different site, just saying. Spargirlspodcast.com. Look at the show notes for this episode, and I'll put the list of all the books that we talked about in here, as well as links to Theodora's courses, and also our Patreon, which is where we can help workshop your blurbs, talk about your own, maybe help you with pulling out the butter or applying butter.
Spreading the butter,
spreading
cooking
the
the
butter, or the butter, rolling in the butter, buttering up. So that's
Rolling
at
in the butter.
patreon.com Spargirls Podcast. So, yeah.
Brilliant.
Awesome. Thank you, Theodora. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much.
So good to see you again.
So much fun. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So crazy how fast the time.
I
Isn't
know.
it just?
I know.
Where does it
Really
go?
is.
3
Um,
years. Wow.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so thank you to all of our listeners for listening to another episode or watching us on YouTube of the Spa Girls podcast. We'll be back again next week with another episode. But for now, farewell.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Keep well.
Bye.